everybody, Mark Moorhead here at the Hall of Flame Museum in Phoenix, Arizona. We are the world's largest historical firefighting museum, and if you can't come into the museum, we're glad to bring the museum to you. And if you enjoy these little segments we do for you, please take a minute to like, subscribe and to our channel, and to share the segments with your friends. We really appreciate that. Now today we're in Gallery 1 here at the Hall of Flame, and we're going to enter the wonderful world of fire extinguishers. Fire extinguishers, they go back pretty far, and we have a pretty good collection of them here, and I want to show you a couple of different pieces that we have. So the extinguishers in this case here, many of them are based on the use of a chemical called carbon tetrachloride. And carbon tetrachloride was excellent at inhibiting fire, but there was a problem with it, which was that it produced a gas called phosgene gas. Deadly poison, which is not a good thing when you're, from a safety point of view. The other thing that was problematic about carbon tetrachloride is that it was eventually found to be just a notorious carcinogen, caused liver cancer. And so, again, there were problems with the basic material, excellent fire retardant though it was. Phosgene was used in World War I. It was a heavier than air gas, so it could actually descend into the trenches, and it did horrible things to the soldiers that it was used against. However, it did have a pretty good safety record when it came to fighting fires. With these, you would just kind of pump them. With some of these in the middle, with some of these down at the end here, are what they called fire grenades. They're very pretty. They're made out of glass, sometimes very beautifully colored glass, and you would just chuck it at the fire and it would break. Some of them had carbon tetrachloride. Some of them were full of water, sometimes salt water, so that they wouldn't freeze in the cold weather. And they just were like a water bomb, like a glass water balloon, basically, that you used to put out the fire. But some of them did also control that carbon tet. And it's not uncommon to find those when you're cleaning out an attic, or sometimes construction people find them when they're doing a retrofit or something like that, often in attics of old houses and old buildings and so forth. And they're very pretty, but you really shouldn't use them to decorate your house. And you can't sell them, you can't ship them. Really what you should do is take them to your local fire department and ask them to dispose of them. It's not, they're actually considered a hazardous material. A few years ago, the TV show Antiques Roadshow came in here, and they did a segment on these because they have a problem with people bringing them to the Antiques Roadshow, and that's usually at a convention center or something like that, and you really aren't supposed to be bringing a hazardous material into a big public building like that. So that's the story on the grenades. These in the middle, these tube-type things, really pretty low tech. They were full of baking soda, was what it came down to, which with certain fires can be a very effective fire retardant. But all you really did was shake those into your hand and just chuck it at the fire. So not necessarily the state-of-the-art kind of technology. So we have a couple of different kinds of fire extinguishers up here. These are much more what sort of we would think of in modern times as looking like a fire extinguisher, but there's more than one kind here. These are what they call soda acid fire extinguishers, in which you have about 2 pounds of sodium bicarbonate broken down in water, dissolved in water, and you also have a small amount, about 4 ounces of sulfuric acid, and when you mix those two, you get this very powerful blast of, it's basically like a big seltzer bottle. And they're very good on what they call Class A fires, wood, paper, stuff like that. These are what they call fomite. And these have some dissolved aluminum sulfate. And again, the same thing, you introduce a little bit of sulfuric acid into that, and you get a very good blast. And those you can use on Class A and Class B fires, which are flammable liquids. Now, there was a problem with these fomite pieces, which is that they were initially approved for Class A or Class B fires, but that stopped being true of Class B fires, flammable liquids, after the introduction of alcohol products into the mixture of gasoline. That alcohol would drain the water out of the foam and dehydrate it, and then it would dissolve the foam, so it no longer was effective after that. Now, for Class C fires, electrical fires, none of these up on the upper shelf were any good because they were based on conductive stuff, water or aluminum sulfate. But you could use CO2 We don't have a CO2 extinguisher on display right here. You could use the carbon tet extinguishers. They were very usable, and you could use dry powder for the electrical fires as well. Now, the last thing that I want to show you here is this guy. Most of the pieces that we have here at the Hall of Flame Museum were pieces that were in active service, that actually went to fires, often probably over decades and decades. This is an exception. This piece spent its whole career at the factory where it was built in Logansport, Indiana. The Boyce fire extinguisher company there had this as a floor model to demonstrate how it worked. You get all the instructions up here, up top here, but this is a big version of one of those soda acid extinguishers. You had a big tank here full of water with sodium bicarbonate dissolved in it. You would introduce that little vial of sulfuric acid and you would get a terrific blast. You'll also find versions of this on a number of our trucks here. We have several trucks that have chemical tanks of that kind, but this one was a model basically. It spent its whole career demonstrating, and this was for an industrial use. This is something you'd have in a factory or a plant or something like that. So that is the history and some of the older shapes of the fire extinguisher. But we also want to talk a little bit about fire extinguishers and us. Most of the equipment that we have here at the Hall of Flame, after all, was built to be used by firefighters and people with some expertise in that field. The fire extinguisher was something that was built to be used by ordinary people, civilians. And so you need to know, if you're going to use a fire extinguisher, how to use it properly. I have an example here, which is one of those soda acid type of extinguishers. And when you go to use this, in those days, you would invert it, and that would introduce the acid into the sodium bicarb, and you get you have to be right ready with the hose, but it's with the nozzle, but you're all set to extinguish that fire. But to get a little more detail on fire extinguishers and their maintenance and their use and their safety and all of that stuff, we're going to step over into Gallery 2 and we're going to talk to one of our favorite docents. So I'll see you over there. So here we are in Gallery 2, and we're with somebody that it's always a privilege to be around, our senior volunteer docent here at the Hall of Flame Museum, former chief of the Whitehall, Michigan Fire Department, and that is our friend Gary Bowlings. He is the top dog senior among our volunteers. Gary, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Okay, so tell me what I need to know if I'm going to go fight a fire on a pan or something on my kitchen table or something like that, or on my stove or something like that.
Well, over the last 15 years, I've probably given hundreds of tours, and I always like to talk about the dry chemical fire extinguisher, because you see them everywhere. You see them in churches, synagogues, schools, and even in museums.
For instance.
And a lot of people have them in their home, and they have no idea how to maintain them, and they really don't know how to use them. So I think everybody should have some instruction to know how to use a dry chemical extinguisher. Now, if you go to use one, the first thing you should think about is if you can't get the fire out with the extinguisher, where's your escape route and how to get people out.
Very good.
Okay, some people call it an ABC extinguisher, some call it a multi-purpose. The reason they call it ABC is that it's good on flammable, on solid wooden paper, because it hits the embers and coats it and prevents it from reigniting. Now,
and that's a Class A fire, right?
That's a Class A fire.
Okay.
Wooden paper. Mm-hmm. But also it's good on B, class flammable liquids, because it interrupts the combustion chain between a oxidizing agent and a fuel. So it works real good on flammable liquids.
Things like gasoline, kerosene, whatever.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it doesn't conduct electricity, so it could be used on Class C fires.
Electrical fires.
So that's why they call it multi-purpose. It's good for anything.
Okay.
Now, a lot of people don't know how to use them. When I was the fire chief, we had a citizen that got burned seriously because he didn't know how to use it. If this was a fire, he had a French fire on fire.
Okay.
And he took the nozzle and he held about 2 inches from the flaming grease. Well, the powder came out at about 200 pounds per square inch,
Yeah.
hit the flaming grease on the wall and back of him, and he would burn. The only good thing about it, he did put the fire out, but he had some serious burn. What I want people to know, if this is a fire,
Okay.
you should be 6 to 8 feet back.
Okay.
Pull the pin. I like to have the nozzle in my dominant hand because I have more dexterity.
Okay.
Aim at the base of the flame, turn it in, and work it. Now also, people should, if they have it in their home, they should inspect it. Here are the fire extinguisher in good working condition. To inspect it, the important thing is you have a plastic tag. The plastic tag tells you that it's never been pulled. It's important that people know if they use a dry chemical extinguisher, it has to be recharged. Now here I have one.
Okay.
Feel it.
Okay.
Full powder, pretty heavy.
Feels heavy.
Yeah. Nothing happens.
Right.
Okay, I got a tank full of powder, but nothing, no propellant to push it out. And the reason is, if you use the powder extinguisher, no matter how little amount, powder gets in the valve seat and prevents it from sealing. And the propellant will leak out over the next week, maybe a month. Then you have a fire a couple months later, you have a tank full of powder, and nothing comes out.
Okay. And how would you get that inspected so that and maintenance if need be?
Okay, as I said, just look at it. If you have a plastic seal, you can tell the pin hasn't been pulled.
Okay.
It hasn't been used. It's also a good idea to look at the gauge.
Sure.
And see the powder's there. So that's what I tell people.
Okay. Well, thank you, Gary. We appreciate that, and we'll take it to heart. And remember, if you like these segments that we do for you, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is Mark and the great Gary Bowling at the Hall of Flame Museum of Firefighting. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.